Hello, everyone. Welcome to how to evaluate multiple sourcing options. Specifically, we're going to look at how to increase throughput with matrix costing. My name is Paul Hesketh, and I am in the expert services team. I'm joined by my colleague, Sarah Neary. Okay, so let's begin. We are going to cover four main things today. I'm going to give you a brief introduction to myself, my background, and then the challenges that we're currently seeing in today's world. So we're going to focus on each of these areas. Once we've covered some challenges, set the stage, I'm going to do a dive into matrix costing. So we'll talk about what it is, when we can use it, why we would use it, and also how to use it. So we'll do a live demo as well. At the end, we'll hopefully have a question session that we can answer anything that has come up. Okay, so once again, if you do have questions at any time during it, please do enter that in the costinsight.com website chat panel and not the Zoom panel. So a little introduction to myself before we get into the matrix costing and demonstration. My name is Paul Hesketh. I've been working with aPriori since 2016. Before aPriori, I studied engineering in Belfast, Northern Ireland, and held roles as a design engineer as well as a manufacturing engineer. So when I joined in 2016, I started with the implementation engineer role, deploying the software, and then moved into a more consultation role with the expert services team. One of the areas we specialize in the expert services team is maximizing the value people get from aPriori. So really trying to drive success with our customers. As such, we're excited as a team when new pieces of technology arise from aPriori, and matrix costing is one of those areas that certainly all of my colleagues and I are very excited about. And that's really what I'm going to focus on today, how matrix costing can be used to drive increased value and success for our customers and for the people on the call today. So with my introduction over, let's first set the scene with some of the challenges that is, pretty prevalent in today's world in engineering, and how this matrix costing solution can help solve some of those challenges. So looking at challenges in today's world, I'm sure it's going to be of no surprise to any of the people on the call today that in a slide where the words challenges and today's world are involved, we're going to be talking a little bit about the pandemic. The pandemic has really changed how we are currently living, both on a personal level as well as our work. And what we've seen in the last year for sure has changed our path in the future. There's an increased need for the ability to accommodate change and be able to adapt. In fact, an article published by the Blackline Group in 2020, they quoted as many as 97% of executives polled said that they would consider reshoring their parts. So people are realizing that there is a need for increased ability to adapt and change how they're currently doing things. So this is an ever-changing landscape, 2020. I'm sure a lot of people have faced many challenges. And as such, in a survey that was conducted in March this year, so right at the beginning of the pandemic, the survey was by the National Institute of Manufacturers, and over 35% of manufacturers that were polled were already facing supply chain disruptions, and that's in March of this year, right at the beginning. This need to focus on time to market because of these disruptions has come to the forefront. And in a time where companies in sectors such as aerospace are facing difficult cuts to budget, creating lean processes now is paramount. It's instrumental to staying afloat and remaining competitive. Lastly, there is always a need to reduce risk in business, and that need to reduce risk is front and center in 2020. I'm sure we can all agree that the pandemic has introduced a lot of inherent risk this year, and even a study by Kearney at the reshoring index in 2019, so before the pandemic, that they showed that there was an increased need for resiliency in supply chains. With the disruptions we've seen in 2020, if anything, that need for resiliency has been accelerated. So what I'd like to do at this point, guys, before we jump into matrix costing, is let's take a minute, if we can, and jump across to a poll. So what I would like to do is poll the people on the call today and get some feedback from you on the challenges you're currently facing. And this poll is on the costinsight.com website. Right beside the chat panel, you will see a poll section as well. So let me just show you where that is. On my screen, you can see the event meeting, the chat panel, and the polls. So if everyone could just take a couple of seconds to vote on some of the options on that poll. I've just outlined a couple of challenges we're seeing across our customers that we work with. And what I'd like to get from this is, as I talk through what matrix costing can do, I'd like to, keep an eye on this poll. I'm going to ask my colleague Sarah to send me the results as we're talking. And I'll try to really tailor what we're talking about today to the challenges that the people on the call are facing. So I'll be quiet for 60 seconds and we can see what those results say. All right, so if you haven't voted on the poll, that's okay. You can do it just as we move through the next slides, but I'm just going to keep going. And first, we're going to look at what matrix costing is. So I've said this phrase a couple of times at the start. We're going to look at the what's, the whys, and the whens. So what is it? Why would I use it? And when would I use it? And let's start with the what. So a little bit of humor here. I'm afraid it's not this. Sorry, we're not going to plug your head into a computer. It's not that sort of thing. That's a few years away yet. My product management team has told me anyway. So what actually is it? Joking aside, I'm sure a lot of the people on the call today will be familiar with what a matrix is in mathematics. So engineers, professionals that deal with numbers and in our profession, most people will be familiar with a matrix. So what we see here is a matrix with two types of variable. We have letters on the left-hand side, A, B, C, D, and we have numbers on the top, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is a 4x4 matrix leading to 16 potential variables. So how does this relate to aPriori? Well, if we replace those arbitrary values with something we're all familiar with, we'll replace the letters with regions, USA, China, Eastern Europe, and Mexico. And we can replace the batch size, or the numbers with batch sizes, 5, 10, 50, 100. So this is putting it in context. We're swapping those things out for something that makes more sense from a should cost. And this sort of analysis, looking at how varying region and varying batch size can impact something like cost is really important for assessing potential opportunities, things like reshoring or resourcing, or even looking at how things like batch size can impact the part routing. Maybe there's different suppliers with different capabilities, and we want to assess all of those side by side. Okay, so now we've seen what we're talking about when we say matrix costing. When would we actually use it? So in this example, I have a simple sheet metal part. This is a part of an enclosure. It has a couple of ventilation holes and some mounting holes, as well as a few bends. What we might do is, if we're thinking of a design use case, where we're going to focus on sourcing, but I do want to put in a little few color spots for design and coding as well. So this one's going to be for design. And when a design engineer who's using aPriori for should cost estimates would potentially use this is if they hear something like, what is the optimal routing for this part? So these sort of keywords should inform us that we should potentially think of matrix costing. And what we can do in this instance is feed the matrix costing some inputs like batch size. Really simple. This is 5 different batch sizes. It will create a 5x1 matrix. And what this will allow a user to do is run these 5 parts concurrently in the background while they work on something else. And when they've ran and costed, we can run the same sorts of analysis that we're used to, things like cost insight reporting. We have some out-of-the-box reports that are really great for this in aPriori Professional, like the spreadsheet reports. And this is one simple example that should be an easy introduction to what matrix costing can do. If we look at coding, here's a different part, a metal machine part, and someone in a coding team may hear a phrase like, we need to respond to an urgent code asking for breakdowns at different estimated annual units or uses. So for something like this, they may need to run a lot of costings, and it's really a lot of non-value added time. So let's see, we have 10 different annual volumes that we'll need to do for this breakdown for the customer. So if we're providing a quote with 10 different breakdowns, first we have to run the first costing, which is going to take a little bit of time. But each subsequent costing, the 9 other costings there, are really the non-value added part of this. It's the same thing with a slight tweak, just a different volume. And matrix costing can help us by running those for us. So this sort of thing lends itself very well on the output side for the analysis to things like cost insight. We have dashboards in there that are really great for tracking suppliers, for tracking people that are generating these shoot costs, the engineers. And we also see a lot of coding teams using custom spreadsheet reports for their suppliers. So this is an example for a coding team, but if we look at something more on the sourcing side, so alternate sourcing options, and a little bit more complex, all of the previous ones were one-dimensional, varying batch size, varying volume. But what happens if we combine multiple variables like we've seen at the start? So in a sourcing team, a reason when we would use this would be if we hear something like, we want to check if there are opportunities in repatriating parts. Can you should cost this in 5 different regions? So if we take that and look at a matrix, what that would be, we could have the variables for the region being China, India, Taiwan, Mexico, and USA, and the other variables being the volumes. So the reason we would want to combine these is maybe at different volumes or batch sizes, reshoring or repatriating a part like this makes more sense. If this part was made in China and being exported to the US, potentially there's tariffs there. So in that instance, you would want to make sure you know everything that you're trying to find out. You're not just trying to find, what is the cost from this region to this. You want to see where the break-even points are. And another option for this would actually be looking at break-even points for tooling as well. So this is a 5x3 matrix, 15 possible scenarios to run. And this sort of analysis, again, takes time. And that's what we're really trying to do with matrix costing, is reduce the time to generate these comparisons. So at this point, we've looked at what it is, looked at when to use it, but let's have a look at why, if that's not obvious yet. So take a look at this chart on the right. We can see that we have efficiency, opportunities, and costs represented. And if we look at each of those, what we're going to see is an increased speed of costing, an increased throughput. So that's going to increase our efficiency. If we're able to cost more parts, we're going to see more opportunities. More opportunities evaluated and costed means the higher probability of reducing cost. So really what we aim to do here is reduce the cost of the resource, costing the parts by making them more efficient and making them able to get through more opportunities and more options, but also look at more opportunities from a cost reduction perspective. So not just reducing the cost of the resource. I'm sure you'll agree, this all looks good in theory. We have a chart here, but let's look at a case study. And we'll look at this just before we jump into the demo. Okay, so case study, we're a sourcing representative, a cost engineer, and a sourcing team. And we have to cost 16 different options for a comparison. So I'll draw your mind back to the matrix we looked at the start. We have the regions on the left, the batch size on the top, and we can do this manually. We're going to look at 3 different options. If we were to cost these manually, if we were to cost these using aPriori one by one, and if we were to cost these using matrix costing. So these are anecdotal examples. We've worked with a lot of customers with very complex parts and very simple parts. These are anecdotal examples. So if we think about manually costing these, the first time we cost a part would probably take us a couple hours. The second iteration of that, maybe changing the region, isn't going to take us anywhere near as long. We can say, maybe researching some rates, building a spreadsheet to do this a little smarter, with some inputs or formulae in it would take us 30 minutes. And then each subsequent costing in this matrix would be much quicker at that point, 5 minutes or so. When we've collected all the data, populating that in a presentable view like a chart or table would take us around 30 minutes and a total of 320 minutes. So again, this is anecdotal, but easily a half a day's effort generating 16 shoot costs. If we look at aPriori, we can see across the board there are substantial reductions, quicker first reduction with our first cost reduction with our geometry extraction, cost models and rates already built in. The second one, we just have to save a new scenario, input those new variables and recost. And then the subsequent ones are about the same time as if you were doing it with a manual method. So we have to create new scenarios every time and recost them. Putting that in a presentable view, we have a lot of out-of-the-box reports and the cost insight reporting platform to help us with that. So that would really do a little bit of a reduction there, but still 2 hours for generating all of these is not unheard of through aPriori. So if we look at the last column and specifically looking at where I've highlighted there, matrix costing aims to help us increase this throughput by reducing the section in the circle. This is non-value added time. This is something that matrix costing generates for us. We don't have to save new scenarios every time, we just do it once. And it also runs it in the background. So there's no additional time for those subsequent costings. We can be working on something completely separate, completely value added. So there's a great benefit to using matrix costing here. Okay, so we've looked at what it is, when we would potentially use it with some different viewpoints from design, sourcing, and coding, and why we would use it, reducing that non-value added time. And what I'd like to do now is go into a demo, but before I jump into the aPriori screen, just want to put up these 3 points, because when we're thinking of using this, there has to be a few things that go through our mind. There has to be a need for matrix costing. So for example, we need to have multiple comparisons for this to be really worthwhile. And there has to be different inputs, things like your batch size, your volume, your region, or your supplier. If that's satisfied and there's a need for this, we need to benchmark the part. So we need to look at the drawing of the part, add any tolerances or any overrides, and set that benchmark. That's a very important step. Once we have the part benchmarked, we can launch matrix costing, give it the inputs that we need very, very quickly, and have it done in the background. So once this is understood, I would like to now jump into a demo. So we're going to open up aPriori. Let me just change my screen. And what we're going to do is open up a sheet metal part. So I am going to open up a little basic sheet metal bracket. A little bit of trivia for those on the call today. This little bracket that I'm opening is actually used internally in aPriori for our own employee awards. So it's not just a made up part, we actually get this manufactured for little awards. It's a nice little bracket. Okay, so on the last slide I showed before aPriori, I said that 1, there has to be a need, and 2, we have to benchmark the part. So the first costing of a part doesn't change. It's very much what we're used to. We choose the process group, the VPE, the routings, and the material. So if we know the production inputs, like the volume and batch size, we'll put that in as well. Once this part has been costed, what we're going to do is come up to cost, and you'll see options we've had before, cost scenario and cost all scenarios. Just below that is matrix costing, and this is the new functionality that we're talking about today. When I click matrix costing, we get a dialog box, and what this allows us to see is the different variables that we can input. So let's think back to that matrix I had on the screen. We had a couple of different regions, China, Eastern Europe, Mexico, and the US. So I'm just selecting all of those together, and if we put in a volume of, let's say, 10,000 per year, and a batch size. So what we can actually do here, which is really useful, is comma separate the batch size. Let's put in 1, 5, 10, and 50. When we comma separate them like that, aPriori is going to build us that matrix. So we click add, and you'll see I have 16 options now available on the screen. This matrix is what we just showed in the presentation. We have each region with a variable batch size, another region with a variable batch size, and if we hit OK here, aPriori is going to launch the bulk costing and analysis module, and when that's launched, it takes a couple of minutes to build the inputs that we've just given. But when it has launched, what we can do is review the options that we have and enter in any differences that we may need. So I'll show you what I mean by that. If you haven't used bulk costing, this may be a new window to you. But if you have, you can see that we have a lot of production inputs here. So one of the things that we've done so far is reduce the non-value added time of creating each one of these inputs. If we need to change things like material, we can do that here. We can also see that extract GCDs is turned off. We've just costed that part, so we don't need to re-extract GCDs, and this can save us a lot of time. So I'm going to cost these parts on the call today, and as I'm costing them, I want to just highlight a couple of different things. So we've just clicked cost. The next thing aPriori does is it indexes these bulk costing inputs, and it's going to run through these sequentially or concurrently. And there's a very important difference there. Out of the box, aPriori will run one by one sequentially, but you can see here, it's just started processing 4 at once. There is an option to increase the amount of parts we can cost concurrently through this module, but it is entirely hardware dependent. We have engineering laptops here at aPriori that are very capable, so we can increase the amount of parts we can cost concurrently. So this is going to cost 4 iterations of this matrix at one time and move on to the others. One of the real great things about matrix costing is this is generating the data that we need to do that comparison. So this is generating the information we need for providing an answer to senior management or to our partners or collaborating with different groups. But while it's generating that data, we can go back to aPriori and still work. And this is, in my opinion, probably the best thing about matrix costing. I can come back to aPriori, open up new parts, generate more should costs, and completely disregard that non-value added time of creating these scenarios and recosting those scenarios. So I can actually come in here, open up some more parts, start to cost those. When they're costed, if I have to run the same comparison, maybe it's generating bid packages for quotes. If I have to run that, I can wait until this has completed by, putting in more value add time, generating the next should cost. You can see it's already costed 4 parts. It's moving on to the next 4. We're currently opening the next part that we can work on. So that value added time is being really increased by utilizing matrix costing. Okay, so when this costs, I just want to touch on a couple of points and Sarah, I know you had a couple of questions that we'll get to in a moment. But a couple of points is we can specify the roll-up name that these parts are going to go into. So if I go to cost, matrix cost, this is a new part. You can tell us the matrix roll-up name that we're going to generate here, or you can leave it the same, and there's benefits for both. If this is something individual, you may want to give it a unique name. But if this is a matrix cost that you may want to update in the future, I would suggest leaving the name as it is, and there's a reason for that. Every matrix cost we do gets time stamped and date stamped. And if you want to override that in the future, leaving this the same name now will make that much easier in the future. If you want to simply append another matrix costing set with different inputs, for example, you can also do that. So you don't always need to replace. You can append or replace. So I'll show you what that does. Let's go back and have a look and see where we are. We're currently costing our last 4 parts. And while we wait on those finishing, I'll go to Sarah. You had a question. Oh, I may need to unmute you, Sarah. Sorry about that. Let's see. There you go. Oh, got it there.
Great. Yes, I had a question. So I wanted to ask, can you use matrix costing to compare materials?
Not directly, no. There is an open request for enhancement to be able to include material in the dialog window. So they've just costed successfully there. What I'll do is I'll hop back to aPriori and show you what I mean. So in the matrix costing window, we have 3 available inputs. The VP, which can represent a region or supplier. We have the annual volume and the batch size. At the moment, that's what we're limited to with matrix costing, but that doesn't mean we can't create a matrix cost with different materials. And I'll give you an example of that. Let's say I wanted to cost 1 part with, let's say 10,000 again annual volume, and we'll just say the batch size of, let's do something a bit bigger, 1,000. So I've picked Brazil and China. If I add those, and I know I need to change materials for these also, I can add them twice here, okay? So I can actually come in and say, let's say, we'll take that off and add them twice. When I do this, that's going to create us 4 instances in the bulk costing. So it's going to load up here in a second. And you can do it manually through this window, but not through the matrix costing window. There is an open request for enhancement for that, however, and it's something that we hopefully will have in the product at a future date. Okay, so in here we can see material has a drop-down. We can change that. We can multi-select and change it as well through here. So we can also select it in here with the material catalog. So we can't do it directly, Sarah, but we can do it with this small workaround. Okay. Another point to touch on today is that matrix costing is not separately licensed. So if you are not licensed for the bulk costing and analysis module, that's okay. You'll still be able to use matrix costing and use the functionality that I've shown today. Is there any other questions that we had in the chat there? Nope. Oh, you're muted again. My apologies.
Yes, we have a question here from Paul Kingerly. Can the system cost using different technologies in each region? So for example, some suppliers may have more traditional equipment compared to modern CNC.
Yes, that's an excellent point. Yes, it can. So what we would need as a prerequisite for that is supplier digital factories or supplier VPs. In those VPs, if we have those capabilities set as routings, so let me just show you. If we have, for example, one supplier that has water jet capabilities, another that doesn't, we can turn on and off these routings based on those suppliers. So if those suppliers have those VPs set up, we can leave aPriori to auto-select the routings, and it will look at different suppliers with different capabilities and give you different costs based on that. In fact, that's one of the the really great uses of this with respect to a sourcing team. It's really evaluating how your supply chain looks, which parts are best suited to which suppliers, and this can really help speed up the analysis of cross comparisons between suppliers. Okay, any other questions that we have today, sir?
Just also wanted to ask, if you recost your matrix, will you override it?
Yeah, so let's see, we have that first matrix costed here. If I come back to recost this, and you'll remember I said you can give it a unique matrix set name, or a you can leave it as the default. If I leave this as the default and set up a new costing, let's just pick a couple of regions, volume, and something small this time. When I go to cost this, I get a warning, and the warning says the following rollup already exists for this matrix set, and we can choose one of the following. We can remove the previous. So let's say this is a bid package and we want to like remove the old one, and this is going to be the new one, that the official one that we use. We can remove it. Or let's say it's something that's iterative. Maybe it's a design engineer looking at different options and they've changed the part and want to rerun a matrix cost and see what has happened. You can preserve the old rollup. And that's really important if you're going to use something like cost insight reporting to do analysis on this. So if we hit preserve, that's going to launch a new matrix into the bulk costing window with a different matrix rollup name. And what I'll do is I'll just show you on the first rollup that we had, the rollup name is at the top, and the scenario name that's given to each of those costings is auto-generated with an increasing number appended to the end. So starting from 1 and going all the way up to 16. If you have a naming convention that you prefer to use, you can override the name in here, but by default, we just append a number to the end of each scenario, and the same if you want to preserve the old one. You'll see that the first costing I did with this part was 2020 11/17 with a timestamp at the end, 17:26. So it's 25 past 5 in the evening here in Ireland. And the next one we did was 17:36, so 10 minutes later. So it does timestamp them as well as date stamp them. You can always keep appending them. It doesn't need to delete them. You can choose to delete them if you want. Okay. Any other questions, sir?
That's it for now.
Oh, excellent. Okay. So what I've shown to this point, guys, is what it is, how to use it, what it looks like in aPriori through the demo. We can use the information that we've generated now to do a lot of different stuff. So I touched on it as I went through with the when would I use this section. But if I search matrix in here under the part number, I'm going to get the rollups that we just generated through matrix costing. If I instead search for matrix with the scenario name, you're going to see all of the individual scenarios that aPriori has created. So all of these were costed in the time that it took me just to chat about the ins and outs of how to use this. I hope it's demonstrating how this can really help reduce non-value add time in generating should costs. And at this point, I believe we're finished with the demo, and I'll open it up for any further questions. So if you do have any questions before we end the session today, please put it into the chat window and we'll hang on for another couple of minutes. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I really do appreciate your time today, for your attention, for your questions, and for the poll results. Interestingly, we've seen that most people have seen capacity issues with reduced workforces and increased demand. So I think this is really going to play a part in helping solve that challenge, especially by looking at other options, other sourcing options that we may have. And we've seen that other options, I'm just looking at the results from Sarah. Time to market and NPI impacted, absolutely. If you're looking at getting cost feedback from your sourcing team with a reduced workforce, that's going to be very challenging. I actually had a very interesting chat with a supplier of one of our customers who said that they're really struggling to keep up with quoting parts, that they've had to hire more resource in 2020 because they're getting so many more quotes for parts that are getting repatriated. that this is the sort of thing that can really help for that. You know, if you're using aPriori to collaborate with a supplier, reducing the supplier's workload and coding is also a benefit to you asking for requests for codes, because your supplier is going to much more likely collaborate more with you and spend the time on things that matter. So, okay, thank you everyone.